Tomorrow, Mom. We in Appos, reselling your beach house. That in Appos, what my son David said to me, standing in my living room with his wife Jennifer beside him, both wearing matching smiles that didn't in Appos, reach their eyes. I was 73 years old, widowed for 5 years, and apparently no longer capable of managing my own life. At least that in Appos, what they wanted me to believe. I stood there in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I in Appos, baked birthday cakes for David every year since he was born, where I in Appos, taught him to make his grandmother in Appos' secret recipe pancakes, where I in Appos, held him when he cried about his first heartbreak. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the counter, the cool marble beneath my palms grounding me in reality. This couldn't and Appos, be happening. Not my David, not my sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them golden treasures. But it was happening. Jennifer stepped forward, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. She touched my arm with fingers that felt cold even through my cardigan. We in Appos, they already found a lovely assisted living facility, Mom. You in Appos, love it there. They have bingo on Tuesdays. She said it like bingo was supposed to make up for losing the home I in Appos, lived in for 42 years, the home where I in Appos, raised David, where I in Appos, nursed my husband Richard through his final illness, where every corner held a memory more precious than gold. My name is Margaret Collins. I worked as a nurse for 37 years, saving lives and comforting the dying. I raised a son by myself for 7 years after Richard and Appos' first heart attack left him unable to work. I scrimped and saved and took double shifts to pay for David and Appos' college education, to make sure he never had student debt, to give him the start in life I never had. And now that son was standing in my home, telling me I needed to sell it. The beach house wasn't in Appos, just any property. Richard and I had bought it in 1983 for $68,000. We in Appos, scraped together the down payment by selling my mother in Appos' jewelry and taking out a second mortgage on Richard and Appos' parents in Appos' old farmhouse. Every summer for 42 years, this house had been filled with laughter and love. David had learned to swim in the ocean just beyond that deck. His first girlfriend had visited him here. Richard had died in the bedroom upstairs, holding my hand and watching the sunrise one last time through those massive bay windows. The house was now worth $2.4 million. I knew because I in Appos, had it appraised 6 months ago, after Jennifer started making comments about what a burden it must be to maintain such a large property. David cleared his throat. Mom, be reasonable. You can in Appos, handle the stairs anymore. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one in Appos' around? His voice carried that patronizing tone I in Appos, started hearing more frequently over the past year, ever since he in Appos, married Jennifer. She was 32, 20 years younger than David, and she in Appos, changed him in ways I in Appos, never imagined possible. I turned to face them fully, studying my son and Appos' face for any trace of the boy I in Appos, raised. His eyes, the same green as his father in Appos' wooden and Appos' meet mine. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an Appos' about my safety. This had never been about my safety. I could still walk 3 miles every morning. I could still drive. I volunteered at the hospital twice a week. But none of that mattered to them. Jennifer pulled out a folder from her designer handbag, the kind that cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. She laid papers on my kitchen table, crisp documents that smelled like fresh printer ink. We in Appos, they taken the liberty of drawing up the paperwork. All you need to do is sign, and we in Appos, handle everything else. The real estate agent says we can close in 30 days. We in Appos, they already put a deposit down on your new apartment. It has a lovely view of a courtyard. A courtyard. After 42 years of waking up to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, of watching dolphins play in the surf, of seeing the sun paint the sky in impossible colors every evening, they wanted me to stare at a courtyard. My chest tightened, that familiar pressure that meant my blood pressure was rising. I in Appos, learned to recognize the signs after years of monitoring patients. How much? I asked quietly. How much are you selling it for? David shifted his weight, and I saw Jennifer and Appo's hand squeeze his arm. 2.2 million, he said. It and Appo's a fair price, Mom. Maybe even a little low for the current market, but the buyers are motivated and willing to close quickly. 2.2 million. They were undervaluing my home by $200,000 to make a quick sale. And where would that money go? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. And the proceeds from the sale? Where will that money be kept? Jennifer answered before David could open his mouth. We thought it would be best to establish a trust. David and I would be the trustees, of course. We and Appo's manage the investments and make sure you have everything you need at the facility. The monthly fees are only $5,000, so the money should last quite a while. $5,000 a month for what was essentially a nice prison. $60,000 a year. Even if I lived to be 93, that would only be $1.2 million. Where would the other million go? I didn't in Appo's need to ask. I could see it in Jennifer and Appo's eyes, in the way she was already mentally redecorating some mansion she and Appo's buy with my money. But what they didn't in Appo's know, what they couldn't in Appo's possibly know, was that I wasn't in Appo's the helpless old woman they imagined. Yes, I was 73. Yes, I had arthritis in my hands. Yes, I sometimes forgot where I put my reading glasses. But my mind was sharp as ever, and I and Appo's learned a few things in my 73 years on this planet. The most important thing I and Appo's learned was this: when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. David had married Jennifer 2 years ago in a small ceremony I and Appo's paid for. $15,000 for a wedding that lasted 4 hours. I and Appo's gifted them $25,000 as a wedding present, money I and Appo's saved from selling Richard and Appo's vintage car collection. 6 months after the wedding, David had asked to borrow $50,000 to invest in a business opportunity. I and Appo's given it to him, no questions asked. He was my son. I trusted him. He and Appo's never paid back a single dollar. When I and Appo's asked about it casually a year later, Jennifer had laughed and said family doesn't and Appo's keep score. Then there was the time Jennifer needed a new car. Her old Mercedes was 2 years old and apparently that was ancient by her standards. David had asked if I could co-sign a loan. I did. They and Appo's missed 3 payments, tanking my credit score before I and Appo's even realized what was happening. When I and Appo's confronted them, Jennifer had cried and said they and Appo's hit a rough patch. I and Appo's ended up paying off the remaining $32,000 just to protect my credit. And there were smaller things. Much smaller. Jennifer borrowing my jewelry for events and never returning it. David taking my late husband and Appo's watch collection to get appraised and somehow 3 watches never made it back. Birthday gifts I and Appo's bought for them being returned for store credit. The time they and Appo's stayed at the beach house for 2 weeks while I was visiting my sister in. Left it in such disarray that I and Appo's had to hire cleaners for $800. I and Appo's made excuses for all of it. They were young. They were building their life together. Money was tight. I was being oversensitive. But standing there in my kitchen, looking at those papers that would sign away my home and my independence, I finally saw the pattern clearly. They weren't an Appo's trying to help me. They were trying to rob me. I took a deep breath, letting the anger settle into something cold and calculating. The nurse in me had learned long ago that panic helped no one. What you needed in a crisis was a clear head and a steady hand. I and Appo's am going to need some time to think about this, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Jennifer and Appo's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Mom, we really need you to decide soon. The buyers might find another property if we wait too long. Then let them find another property. I picked up the folder and held it out to her. I and Appo's am not signing anything today. This is my home, my decision, and I and Appo's make it on my own timeline. David and Appo's face flushed red, a sign I recognized from his childhood. He in Appos, D always been quick to anger when he didn't in Appos, T get his way. Mom, you in Appos, re being unreasonable. We in Appos, re trying to help you. Then help me by respecting my wishes. I walked to the front door and opened it, the late afternoon sun streaming in and illuminating the hardwood floors Richard had refinished by hand the year before he died. I think you should both leave now. We can discuss this another time when I and Appos, they had a chance to review everything properly. Jennifer gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements, shoving them back into her designer bag. You and Appos, remaking a mistake, she said, her voice no longer carrying that fake sweetness. You can and Appos, T live here alone forever. Watch me. I held the door open wider, waiting. They left, Jennifer and Appos, heels clicking sharply against the porch steps, David not even looking back at me. I watched their BMW pull out of my driveway, and only then did I close the door and lean against it, my legs suddenly weak. But I didn't and Appos, T cry. I was too angry to cry. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out a box I kept in the back of my closet. Inside were documents I and Appos, D been collecting for the past 6 months, ever since I and Appos, D started noticing the changes in David and Appos' behavior. Bank statements showing the $50,000 he and Appos, D borrowed and never repaid. The loan documents for Jennifer and Appos' car with my signature as co-signer. Receipts for all the money I and Appos, D given them over the past 2 years. It totaled $137,416. I and Appos, D been keeping track without realizing I was building a case. But what they really didn't in Appos, T know, what would change everything, was sitting in my safe deposit box at the bank. 2 weeks ago, I and Appos, D updated my will. My lawyer, Patricia Morrison, was an old friend from my nursing days. We and Appos, D worked together for 15 years before she went to law school. She knew me, knew Richard, and she and Appos, D known David since he was a baby. When I and Appos, D told her about my concerns, she and Appos, D listened without judgment. Then she and Appos, D said something that had sent chills down my spine. Margaret, I need to tell you something. David came to see me 3 months ago. He wanted to know about your assets, your estate plan. He said he was worried about your mental capacity. He asked me if it would be possible to have you declared incompetent. The words had hit me like a physical blow. My own son had been planning this for months. Patricia had refused, of course. She and Appos, D told David that I was perfectly competent and that any attempt to claim otherwise would be challenged vigorously in court. But the fact that he and Appos, D tried, that he and Appos, D already been thinking about how to take control of my assets before I was even dead, that changed everything. So I and Appos, D changed my will. If I died or became incapacitated while David and Jennifer were married, everything would go to charity. The house, the investments, the life insurance, all of it. David would get nothing. There was a provision that if they divorced, the original will would be reinstated. But as long as Jennifer was in the picture, as long as I had evidence that they were exploiting me financially, my estate would be protected. Patricia had also given me advice at I and Appos, D followed to the letter. She told me to document everything. Take photos, save emails and text messages. Record conversations if Florida law allowed it, which it did as a 2-party consent state as long as I announced I was recording. Build a case. Protect myself. I and Appos, D been doing exactly that. Now, sitting in my bedroom with the late afternoon sun painting everything gold, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The first was to Patricia. I need to see you tomorrow morning, I said when she answered. They just tried to get me to sign papers selling the house. They and Appos, they already found buyers. They and Appos, they put a deposit on an assisted living facility. They and Appos, moving faster than we thought. Patricia and Appos' voice was grim when she responded. Come to my office at 9. Bring any documents they gave you. We need to get ahead of this before they try something more aggressive. My second call was to my sister Linda in Boston. She was 5 years younger than me, spry and fierce and absolutely terrifying when someone threatened her family. I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Linda said in a voice that could cut glass, "I and Appos, am coming down there. I and Appos, LL be on a plane tomorrow. That little shit and his gold digger wife are not stealing your home. Richard would roll over in his grave. You Don and Appos, have to do that," I started to say, but Linda cut me off. "Yes, I do. You and Appos, my sister. You took care of Mom when she was dying. You helped put my kids through college. You and Appos, given and given and given your whole life. Now it and Appos, time to stop giving and start fighting back. I and Appos, see you tomorrow evening." The third call I made was to someone David had forgotten about entirely. Robert Martinez had been Richard and Appos' best friend since high school. He was 82 now, a retired judge, and he and Appos, loved Richard like a brother. When Richard died, Robert had told me if I ever needed anything at all, I just had to ask. I and Appos, never asked. Until now. Robert, it and Appos, Margaret. I need your help. I proceeded to explain the situation, every detail, every manipulation, every lie. Robert listened in silence, and when I finished, I heard him exhale slowly. "Margaret, I want you to do something for me. I want you to write down everything that and Appos has happened. Every dollar David and Jennifer have taken from you. Every promise they and Appos, broken. Every lie they and Appos, told. And I want you to gather every piece of documentation you have. Then I and Appos, am going to make some calls." "What kind of calls?" "The kind that will make sure your son understands that elder exploitation is a crime in Florida. The kind that will make sure he knows that if he continues down this path, he and Appos, just lose his inheritance. He and Appos, lose his freedom. Robert, I Don and Appos, want to send my son to jail. Then your son better stop trying to steal from his mother. I and Appos, be in touch tomorrow." That night, I didn't and Appos, sleep much. I lay in bed listening to the waves, the same waves I and Appos, been listening to for 42 years. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that had become the soundtrack of my life. I thought about David as a little boy, chasing seagulls on the beach. I thought about Richard teaching him to fish off the pier. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, the holidays, the ordinary precious moments that made up a life. And I thought about how the son I and Appos, raised had turned into someone I barely recognized. But what I didn't in Appos, know yet, what I couldn't in Appos, possibly have imagined, was that David and Jennifer and Appos' plans went far deeper than just selling my house. I would discover that in the morning, and it would change everything. I woke at 6, my usual time, and made coffee. The sunrise over the ocean was particularly beautiful, streaks of pink and orange and gold painting the sky. I took my coffee onto the deck and sat in Richard and Appos' old chair, the wood worn smooth from decades of use. The morning was cool, the air salty and fresh. A pod of dolphins played in the surf about 100 yards out, their bodies sleek and graceful. This was my home. This was my life. And I and Appos, be damned if I and Appos, let anyone take it from me. At 8:30, I drove to Patricia and Appos' office. She was waiting for me with another woman I didn't and Appos, recognize, someone younger with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. "Margaret, this is Sarah Chen. She and Appos, a forensic accountant I and Appos, worked with on elder exploitation cases." Sarah shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Collins, Patricia and Appos, briefed me on your situation. I and Appos, like to look at your financial records for the past 3 years if you and Appos, willing. I specialize in identifying patterns of financial abuse. Often, there in Appos, more going on than the victim realizes. We spent 3 hours going through everything. Bank statements, credit card records, loan documents, canceled checks." Sarah took notes on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. When we finished, she sat back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't in Appos, quite red. "Mrs. Collins, in my professional opinion, you and Appos, been the victim of systematic financial exploitation. The total amount David and Jennifer have taken from you over the past 2 years is actually higher than you calculated. When we include the loan you co-signed that damaged your credit, the wedding expenses, the gifts that were returned for cash, the jewelry that was never returned, and several other transactions Ian Appos, they identified, the total is closer to $183,000. The number hit me like a punch to the gut. $183,000. That was almost 4 years of Richard and Appos' pension. Patricia leaned forward. Margaret, they're in Appos' something else. I did some digging yesterday after you called. David and Jennifer are in serious financial trouble. They in Appos' 3 months behind on their mortgage. They in Appos' they maxed out 7 credit cards. Jennifer in Appos' car is about to be repossessed. They in Appos' they been living far beyond their means for over a year, and they in Appos' drowning in debt. That in Appos' why they need your house, Sarah added. They need a cash infusion, and they need it fast. $2.2 million would solve all their problems and leave them with plenty left over for their lifestyle. But they're in Appos' more, Patricia said, and her voice carried a weight that made my stomach drop. David went to 3 different lawyers before he came to me, asking about having you declared incompetent. All 3 turned him down. But one of them, Bernard Westfield, gave him some advice that in Appos' deeply concerning. What advice? Patricia pulled out a document. Westfield told David that if you were to have a medical emergency, if you were hospitalized or somehow unable to make decisions for yourself, it would be much easier to establish guardianship. Especially if David was your closest relative and could present evidence that you and Appos' been showing signs of cognitive decline. I felt cold despite the warm office. Are you saying what I think you and Appos' saying? I and Appos' saying that David has been researching ways to have you declared incompetent. And I and Appos' saying that a convenient medical emergency would make that much easier. I and Appos' not suggesting he would hurt you physically. But there are other ways to create a crisis. Medication errors, stress-induced health problems, a fall that could be blamed on you living alone in a too large house. Sarah nodded. I and Appos' they seen this pattern before, Mrs. Collins. When an elderly person stands between someone and a significant amount of money, and when that someone is desperate financially, things can escalate quickly. I and Appos' not trying to scare you, but you need to understand the danger you and Appos' potentially in. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't an Appos' from fear. It was from fury. My son, the boy I and Appos' raised, the child I and Appos' sacrificed everything for, was researching ways to have me declared incompetent so he could steal my home. And based on what Patricia and Sarah were suggesting, he might be willing to go even further than that. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia smiled, but it wasn't an Appos' warm smile. It was the smile of a lawyer about to go to war. First, we make sure you and Appos' protected. I and Appos' they drawn up a new power of attorney document that names your sister Linda as your agent, not David. We and Appos' LL also establish a revocable trust that holds your assets, with you as the primary beneficiary and trustee. This will make it much harder for David to claim you and Appos' incompetent or to access your assets without your consent. Second, Sarah said, we document everything. I want you to wear a recording device when you interact with David and Jennifer. Florida law allows recording as long as one party consents, and you and Appos' consenting. We need to capture their attempts to manipulate you, to pressure you, to lie to you about your options. Third, Patricia continued, we send David and Jennifer a cease and desist letter. We inform them that any further attempts to coerce you into selling your property or signing over control of your assets will be considered elder exploitation and reported to law enforcement. We also inform them that you and Appos', aware of all the money they and Appos' they taken from you, and you expect immediate repayment. And fourth, Robert Martinez is using his connections to have the state attorney and Appos' office open a preliminary investigation. If David and Jennifer continue their behavior, they and Appos' LL be walking straight into a criminal case. But what if they back off? I asked. What if they just disappear and never pay back what they took? Then you cut them out of your life completely, Patricia said bluntly. I know that an appos, as painful, Margaret. I know he an appos, as your son. But at some point, you have to protect yourself, even from family. Especially from family. I sat there in Patricia and Appo's office, looking at these two women who were fighting for me, fighting to protect me from my own child, and I felt something shift inside me. For 2 years, I and Appo's been making excuses for David and Appo's behavior. I and Appo's been telling myself that he was just going through a hard time, that Jennifer was a bad influence, that deep down he was still the sweet boy I and Appo's raised. But that boy was gone. Maybe he and Appo's never really existed. Maybe I and Appo's been so busy trying to be a good mother that I and Appo's failed to see who David really was. Or maybe Jennifer had changed him. Maybe she and Appo's brought out the worst in him, encouraged his greed, fed his sense of entitlement. Either way, the man who and Appo's stood in my kitchen yesterday was not someone I could trust. Let and Appo's did, I said. All of it, every step. I and Appo's done being a victim. Patricia pulled out more documents. Sign here, and here, and here. We and Appo's, going to make sure you and Appo's, protected, Margaret. I promise you that. I signed everything, my hand steady now. When we finished, Sarah handed me a small device that looked like a pen. This is a recording pen. Click the top 3 times to start recording. It will capture everything within 20 feet and stores up to 8 hours of audio. Keep it in your pocket or purse whenever you and Appo's, around David and Jennifer. I took the pen, feeling its weight in my palm. It felt like armor, like protection, like power. That afternoon, Linda arrived. She burst through my door with her 2 suitcases and her fierce energy, pulling me into a hug that lasted a full minute. Oh, Maggie, she said, using my childhood nickname. I can and Appo's believe that ungrateful little bastard is doing this to you. We sat on the deck and I told her everything, every detail I had in an Appo's shared on the phone. Linda listened, her face growing darker with every revelation. When I finished, she said, tomorrow, we and Appo's, going to the police. We and Appo's, filing a report for financial exploitation. Even if they Don and Appo's, prosecute right away, it creates a paper trail. It establishes that you and Appo's, aware of what and Appo's, happening and you and Appo's, not a confused old woman making false accusations. Patricia already has someone at the state attorney and Appo's office looking into it. Good. But we and Appo's, still going to the police. Multiple agencies need to know what and Appo's, happening. And then we and Appo's, going to make sure every single person in David and Appo's, life knows what he and Appo's, trying to do to you. His friends, his colleagues, anyone he cares about. We and Appo's, going to expose him. I hesitated. Linda, he and Appo's, still my son. She grabbed my hands, her grip fierce. And you and Appo's, still his mother. The mother who gave him everything. The mother who sacrificed her own comfort and security to make sure he had a good life. And this is how he repays you? By trying to steal your home? By researching ways to have you declared incompetent? No. Hell no. He doesn't and Appo's, get to hide behind family loyalty when he and Appo's, the one who broke that bond. She was right. I knew she was right. But it still hurt. It hurt in a way that went deeper than any physical pain I and Appo's, ever experienced. This was my child. I and Appo's, carried him in my body for 9 months. I and Appo's, loved him before I even knew his face. And now he was trying to destroy me for money. The next morning, Linda and I went to the police station. We met with a detective named Maria Santos who specialized in elder exploitation cases. She was maybe 40, with kind eyes and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. I told her everything, and she took copious notes. Mrs. Collins, she said when I finished, what you and Appo's, described is consistent with a pattern of financial abuse. The challenge is proving criminal intent. Your son could argue that the money you gave him was gifts, that you co-signed the loan willingly, that you and Appo's, now confused about the nature of these transactions. But I have documentation, I said, pulling out the folder Sarah had helped me prepare. Every loan, every request for money, every missed payment. It and Apos, all here. Detective Santos reviewed the documents carefully. This is good. This is very good. Combined with the fact that he and Apos been consulting lawyers about having you declared incompetent, and the fact that he and Apos now pressuring you to sell your home, we have the foundation for a case. I and Apos am going to refer this to the Financial Crimes Unit. They and Apos LL want to interview you formally and gather additional evidence. What should I do in the meantime? Document everything. Don and Apos, sign anything. Don and Apos, give them any more money. And if they threaten you in any way, call 911 immediately. Do you feel safe in your home? I thought about it. With Linda here, yes. But after she leaves? Detective Santos pulled out a card. This is the number for Adult Protective Services. They can do a home safety assessment and set up regular check-ins. They can also work with you to create a safety plan if you feel threatened. I took the card, another piece of armor in my growing collection. That afternoon, David called. I was on the deck with Linda when my phone rang. Linda nodded at me, and I pulled out the recording pen, clicking it 3 times before answering. Mom, we need to talk. David and Apos' voice was tight with barely controlled anger. You can. Apos, just ignore this situation. We have buyers ready to close. We have an apartment waiting for you. You and Apos, being completely unreasonable. I and Apos, being unreasonable? I kept my voice calm, controlled. David, you came into my home and tried to pressure me into selling my house without giving me time to even think about it. You and Apos, they already made decisions about my life without consulting me. How is that not unreasonable? We and Apos, trying to help you, Mom. You can and Apos, live there alone anymore. It and Apos, not safe. I live here just fine. I have no mobility issues. I have no cognitive problems. My doctor says I and Apos am in excellent health for my age. So explain to me exactly why I need to move into assisted living. There was a pause. Then Jennifer and Apos' voice in the background, sharp and insistent, though she was trying to speak quietly. I couldn't and Apos make out the words, but the tone was clear. She was telling him what to say. Mom, you and Apos, not getting any younger. What happens if you fall? What happens if you have a medical emergency and no one in Apos' there? We and Apos, rethinking about your future. My future is my concern, David. Not yours. If and when I decide I can no longer live independently, I and Apos, LL make that decision. But that time ISN and Apos, now, and when it comes, I and Apos, LL decide where I go and what happens to my assets. Your assets? David and Apos' voice rose. Mom, we and Apos, family. Why are you suddenly talking about your assets like we and Apos, strangers? Because you and Apos, treating me like a bank, not like your mother. In the past 2 years, I and Apos, they given you over $180,000. You Haven and Apos, paid back a single cent. You and Apos, they damaged my credit. You and Apos, they taken my property. And now you want to sell my home and put me in a facility. Can you understand why I might be a little cautious about trusting you with my financial decisions? Silence on the other end. Then, who told you that number? Who and Apos, they you been talking to? I and Apos, they been talking to my lawyer. And my accountant. And the police. The police? David and Apos' voice cracked. You called the police on me? I and Apos, am your son. You and Apos, also someone who and Apos, been exploiting me financially. That and Apos, a crime, David. It and Apos, called elder exploitation, and in Florida, it and Apos, a felony. Jennifer and Apos' voice in the background, louder now. Tell her we and Apos, LL sue. Tell her we and Apos, LL have her declared incompetent. I heard that, Jennifer, I said clearly. And I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded. Everything you and Apos, they just said is now documented. So please, continue threatening to have me declared incompetent. My lawyer would love to add that to her case file. More silence. Then David said in a voice I barely recognized, "You and Apos, they changed, Mom. You used to trust me. I used to have a son who was trustworthy. I Don and Apos, T anymore. Don and Apos, T contact me again unless you and Apos, prepared to pay back every dollar you and Apos, they taken from me and apologize for what you and Apos, they done. Otherwise, you and Apos, LL be hearing from my lawyer." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Linda took it from me and pulled me into a hug. "You did great," she said. "You were strong and clear and you didn't and Apos, T let them manipulate you." That felt terrible, I whispered. That felt like the worst thing I and Apos, they ever done. That and Apos, because you and Apos, a good person who loves her son. But Maggie, listen to me. That person on the phone wasn't an Apos, T the son you raised. That was someone who an Apos, been corrupted by greed and desperation. And the only way to save him, if he can be saved at all, is to stop enabling him. You have to let him hit rock bottom. What if rock bottom is prison? Linda and Apos' face was hard. Then so be it. You didn't and Apos, T put him there. His choices put him there. 2 days later, Patricia called. "Margaret, I need you to come to my office immediately. Something and Apos' happened." I drove there with a sick feeling in my stomach. When I walked in, Patricia and Apos' face was grave. She gestured to a chair and handed me a document. "David and Jennifer filed a petition yesterday afternoon. They and Apos, trying to have you declared incapacitated and requesting emergency guardianship." I stared at the document, the words swimming before my eyes. They were claiming I had dementia. That I was paranoid and delusional. That I was making wild accusations against my loving son who was only trying to help me. They had a doctor in Apos' letter attached, from a physician I in Apos' D never heard of, claiming I showed signs of cognitive decline during a consultation. "I never saw this doctor," I said. "I Don and Apos, T know who this is." Patricia nodded grimly. "I figured as much. This is doctor shopping. They found someone willing to write a letter based on their description of your behavior, without actually examining you. It and Apos' unethical and probably illegal. But they and Apos, going to use it to argue for an emergency hearing. Can they win? Not if I have anything to say about it. We have documentation of your mental competency. We have your actual doctor in Apos' records showing you and Apos, cognitively intact. We have the fact that you and Apos, they've been working with lawyers and accountants, which demonstrates clear decision-making ability. And we have recordings of them pressuring you and threatening you, which shows their real motivation." "When and Apos, the hearing?" "Next week, Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. I want you to bring Linda, bring any friends who can testify to your mental competency, and be prepared to tell the judge exactly what in Apos' been happening." The week leading up to the hearing was the longest of my life. I barely slept. I couldn't in Apos' eat. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Linda stayed with me the whole time, her presence the only thing keeping me grounded. Robert Martinez came to visit. He sat on my deck and drank coffee and told me stories about Richard, about the boys they in Apos' been, the men they in Apos' become. Then he said, "Margaret, I want you to know something. I and Apos, they seen a lot of ugly things in my career as a judge. Family fighting over money is one of the ugliest. But I and Apos, they also seen justice prevail. You and Apos, going to get through this. And when you do, you and Apos, going to have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with David. I Don and Apos, know if I can forgive him for this." Robert nodded. "That and Apos, understandable. But remember this. Forgiveness isn and Apos, about letting him off the hook. It and Apos, about freeing yourself from the burden of hatred. You Don and Apos, have to have a relationship with him to forgive him. You just have to let go of the anger that and Apos, eating you alive." The day of the hearing arrived. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one Richard had always said made me look distinguished. Linda sat beside me in the courtroom. Patricia sat at the table, her papers organized and ready. On the other side, David and Jennifer sat with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. I hadn't an Appos, seen my son in person since the hearing had been filed. Looking at him now, I searched his face for any sign of remorse, any hint that he understood what he was doing to me. But his expression was hard, determined. Jennifer whispered something in his ear, and he nodded. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. Judge Rebecca Morrison. No relation to Patricia, but Patricia had told me she had a reputation for seeing through bullshit. The hearing began. David and Appos' lawyer went first, painting a picture of a confused elderly woman who was paranoid, making false accusations, and unable to manage her own affairs. He presented the fraudulent doctor and Appos' letter. He talked about the B.C.H. house being too much for me to handle. He made me sound like I was one step away from wandering into traffic. Then Patricia stood up. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and strong, this is not a case of an incapacitated elder needing protection. This is a case of financial exploitation disguised as concern. I and Appos' like to present evidence. She proceeded to lay out everything. The money David and Jennifer had taken. The loan that had damaged my credit. The attempts to have me declared incompetent before this petition. The recording of their threatening phone call. The fact that I and Appos' been working with lawyers, accountants, and police, all of which demonstrated clear cognitive function. Then she called witnesses. My actual doctor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, testified that I was cognitively intact, physically capable, and showed no signs of dementia or impairment. She and Appos' brought my medical records dating back 5 years, showing consistent cognitive testing scores. Linda testified about my daily life, my volunteer work, my independence. Robert Martinez testified about his conversations with me, about my clear understanding of the situation and my reasonable concerns about financial exploitation. Detective Santos testified about the ongoing investigation into David and Jennifer and Appos' financial abuse. And finally, Patricia played the recording of the phone call. In the quiet courtroom, David and Jennifer and Appos' voices echoed. Tell her we and Appos' LL sue. Tell her we and Appos' LL have her declared incompetent. When the recording ended, Judge Morrison looked at David with an expression that could freeze fire. Mr. Collins, do you have anything to say for yourself? David stood up, his face pale. Your Honor, I was trying to help my mother. I was worried about her living alone. I thought. You thought you could steal her house and her independence, the judge interrupted. You thought you could exploit your elderly mother and Appos' trust and take advantage of her generosity. And when she stood up for herself, you tried to have her declared incompetent so you could take control of her assets. That and Appos' not, David started, but the judge held up her hand. I and Appos' seen enough. This petition is denied. Mrs. Collins is clearly competent to manage her own affairs. Furthermore, I and Appos' am issuing a restraining order. Mr. Collins, you and your wife are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Collins or coming within 500 feet of her property. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. She looked at me then, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Collins, you have my sincere apologies that you had to endure this. I and Appos' am also referring this case to the state attorney and Appos' office for possible criminal prosecution of elder exploitation charges. The gavel came down. It was over. David and Jennifer left quickly, Jennifer and Appos' heels clicking angrily against the courthouse floor. David didn't and Appos' look at me. Not once. Outside the courthouse, Linda hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You did it, she said. You stood up for yourself and you won. But I didn't and Appos' feel like I and Appos' won. I felt like I and Appos' lost my son. Patricia must have seen something in my face because she said gently, Margaret, you IDN and Appos' lose your son today. You lost an illusion of who you thought your son was. The real David, the man who would try to steal from his own mother, that and Appos' who he and Appos' always been. You just finally saw it clearly. The next week, the state attorney and Appos' office formally charged David and Jennifer with elder exploitation and fraud. The fraudulent doctor and Appos' letter had been the final straw. Apparently, they and Appos' paid the doctor $5,000 to write it without ever bringing me in for an examination. That was multiple crimes right there. David and Jennifer in Appo's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't in Appo's interested. The case was too egregious, too well documented. It was going to trial. I was told I and Appo's have to testify. The thought made me sick, but Detective Santos assured me that my testimony was crucial. These are predators, Mrs. Collins, she said. They won in Appo's, stop with you. If we don and Appo's, prosecute this case, they in Appo's, find another vulnerable person to exploit. Your testimony could protect other families from going through what you and Appo's, they experienced. So I agreed, because she was right. This wasn't an Appo's, just about me anymore. But before the trial, something happened that I didn't in Appo's, expect. 6 weeks after the hearing, I received a letter. It was from David, handwritten on lined notebook paper. Dear Mom, it began. I don and Appo's, know if you and Appo's, read this. I don and Appo's, know if I deserve for you to read this. But I need to tell you that I and Appo's, am sorry. I sat on my deck, the same deck where this nightmare had begun, and I read my son and Appo's letter through tears. He told me everything, how he and Appo's gotten in over his head financially. How Jennifer had expensive tastes and he and Appo's been too proud to admit he couldn't and Appo's afford her lifestyle. How the debt had piled up until he couldn't and Appo's see any way out. How Jennifer had suggested that my house was the solution to all their problems. How she and Appo's convinced him that I didn't and Appo's really need such a large property, that I and Appo's be happier in assisted living. He wrote, I know this sounds like I and Appo's am blaming Jennifer, and maybe I am partly. But the truth is, I made these choices. I took your money. I damaged your credit. I tried to take your home. And when you stood up for yourself, I tried to destroy your credibility and take away your freedom. I did those things. Me, your son, and I can and Appo's take them back. I and Appo's am writing this from a place where I finally have clarity. Jennifer and I are getting divorced. She left me the day after the restraining order was issued. Turns out she wasn't an Appo's interested in staying married to someone who couldn't an Appo's give her the lifestyle she wanted. She and Appo's already dating someone else, someone with money. And you know what? I and Appo's am relieved. Being with her brought out the worst in me. Or maybe it just revealed who I really was all along. I and Appo's am not sure anymore. I and Appo's am not asking for forgiveness. I know I don and Appo's deserve it. I and Appo's am not asking you to drop the charges. I deserve whatever punishment I get. I and Appo's am just asking you to know that I and Appo's am sorry. I and Appo's am sorry I wasn't an Appo's the son you deserved. I and Appo's am sorry I threw away everything you gave me. I and Appo's am sorry I became someone you had to protect yourself from. I hope you and Appo's re well. I hope you and Appo's re happy in your beautiful house by the ocean. I hope you and Appo's re surrounded by people who actually love you and treat you with the respect you deserve. I love you, Mom. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do love you. And I and Appo's am sorry. David. I sat there for a long time, holding that letter, watching the sun set over the ocean. The dolphins were playing again, their joyful leaping a stark contrast to the heaviness in my heart. Linda found me there an hour later. She sat down beside me without saying anything, just being present the way she and Appo's always been present for me. Finally, she said, What are you going to do? I don and Appo's know. Part of me wants to tell the prosecutor I won and Appo's testify. Part of me wants to give him another chance. But part of me knows that another chance is probably just setting myself up for more heartbreak. Linda nodded. Maggie, only you can make that decision. But whatever you decide, I and Appo's support you. The trial was set for 3 months away. I had time to think, time to process, time to decide what I really wanted. What I wanted, I realized, was peace. I wanted to wake up in my beautiful house and not feel afraid. I wanted to volunteer at the hospital and not wonder if David was going to show up. I wanted to swim in the ocean and watch the dolphins and feel joy again instead of this constant ache. And I realized that I couldn't in Appos, have peace until I had justice. Not vengeance. Justice. There in Appos, a difference. Justice meant David facing consequences for his actions. Justice meant other potential victims being protected. Justice meant speaking truth even when it was painful. So when the trial came, I testified. I told the truth, all of it, every painful detail. I looked at David across the courtroom and I told the jury exactly what he and Appos, done to me. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. David was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of $183,000 plus interest. Jennifer got 18 months and was also ordered to pay restitution, though everyone knew she and Appos, never pay a cent. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine. Linda was there, and Patricia, and Robert, and Dr. Warren, and Detective Santos. They in Appos, all come to support me, these people who in Appos, fought for me when my own son had tried to destroy me. We went to dinner that night, all of us, at a restaurant overlooking the ocean. We toasted to justice, to friendship, to the strength it takes to stand up for yourself even when it means losing someone you love. Robert raised his glass and said, "To Margaret, who taught us all that family is about love and respect, not blood and obligation. And to second chances, which are only meaningful when people actually change." I drank to that. A year later, I in Appos, still in my beach house. I wake up every morning to the sound of waves. I volunteer at the hospital 3 days a week now instead of 2. I in Appos, they started a support group for victims of elder exploitation, helping others navigate the same nightmare I survived. Linda visits every few months. Patricia and I have become close friends. Robert still comes for coffee on Sunday mornings. And David? David served 18 months and was released early for good behavior. When he got out, he asked if he could see me. I said yes, but only if we met in a public place with Linda present. We met at a coffee shop halfway between his new apartment and my house. He looked older, thinner, humbler. He in Appos, started working as a janitor at a community college. It wasn't in Appos, much, but it was honest work. "Mom," he said, "I in Appos, they been going to therapy. I in Appos, they been working on myself, on understanding why I made the choices I made. I in Appos, am not asking you to trust me again. I in Appos, am not asking to be part of your life. I just wanted you to know that I in Appos, am trying to be better." I looked at my son, this man who in Appos, caused me so much pain, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of something like it. "I in Appos, am glad you in Appos, getting help," I said. "I hope you continue on that path." He nodded. "I in Appos, am also starting to pay back the restitution. It in Appos, going to take years, maybe decades. But I in Appos, am going to pay back every cent." We talked for another hour, carefully, like TW. People learning each other in Appos' language for the first time. When we parted, he asked if he could email me sometimes, just to let me know how he was doing. I said yes. That was 6 months ago. He emails once a month, brief updates about his job, his therapy, his slow progress toward becoming a better person. I read them, and sometimes I respond. We in Appos, not mother and son, not the way we used to be. Maybe we never will be again. But we in Appos, something. We in Appos, 2 people trying to find a way forward after everything broke. And that in Appos, enough for now. I in Appos, am 75 now. I still swim in the ocean every morning when it in Appos, warm enough. I still watch the dolphins play. I still make pancakes using my grandmother in Appos' recipe. I still live in the house Richard and I built our life in, the house David tried to take from me. But now I also have something else. I have my dignity back. I have my independence back. I have proof that even when the people you love try to break you, you can stand up and fight back and win. And I have peace. Finally, after everything, I have peace. That in Appos, worth more than any house, any amount of money, any relationship. That in Appos, worth everything.